Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel where I still don't have any of the proper equipment, I refuse to follow the script, and I have a bad habit of making things sound way dirtier than they should at the worst possible moment. This video is a special request I got a while back from a subscriber shown here, and they requested I do a video on a killer that I, oddly enough, never heard of before. Strange, I know, but I never said I was an expert. I'm just some twisted bitch with a fucked up YouTube channel, truly. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't do this video right away because I had the 100 sub video that I was doing, and then, of course, the pedo fail video kind of got in the way. But now that those videos are all said and done, I can finally get to this one, so I do apologize for that delay. I admit when I first heard of this unknown killer, I was rather titillated, and I do so love new topics. And let me tell you, my murderous horde, I was not disappointed when I dug into the history of this character. Oh, yes, this was indeed a wonderfully horrific little monster for me to sink my teeth into. So thank you, my dear one, for the suggestion, and as I told you in my responding comment, I am more than happy to do a video for my good old Canadian neighbors. And I do love the fresh blood. Thanks for the fresh blood. Now, without further ado, you know the drill. Grab a beer, sit back, relax, and let's have ourselves a little conversation. The killer of the hour is none other than Robert William Pickton, or Willie Pickton, as he was more commonly known as, and the first thing I will state about him is the stereotypical oddity that he does appear to be. For not only was he a serial killer, he was also a millionaire, a pig farmer, and in fact, Canadian. Truly a first on my channel. And a Canadian serial killer, that doesn't sound right, now does it? I've been to Canada a couple times myself, more than a couple, actually. I lost count of how many times I've been to Canada. It kind of doesn't really fit, now does it? Kind of feels like that would be more akin to an Amish computer hacker. But all jokes aside, I assure you this man is very, very real, and his crimes are truly a horror show to tell. In truth, this monster is nothing to joke about, and in fact I will refrain from making my usual jokes or any lewd humor from here on out to respect not only my subscriber who requested this, but also the families of the victims that could possibly be watching this. Pickton's crimes not only devastated and shocked an entire country, but due to how recently that these crimes were actually committed, the wounds are still quite fresh within the hearts and minds of the Canadian people, the families of the victims, and even the Vancouver police. Willie Pickton was born in British Columbia, Canada, and was just convicted in 2007. I cannot pronounce the actual name of the city in which he was born. I will post it below, and perhaps one of my Canadian viewers or one of my viewers from Canada can tell me the correct pronunciation of it. His kill count is nearly 50 women, according to his own testimony, and due to the inhuman methods in which he disposed of his victims, earned him the name The Butcher, and quite aptly so. Pickton has also been added to my list of serial killer infamy in the top 10, matter of fact, though I doubt I will be coming across any serial killer who will outrank the #1 spot currently held by Albert Fish. He was charged with the death of 6 women initially, and has been convicted on 6 of them, though later an additional 20 women, many from the Vancouver downtown east side, were also added to the charges, but were later stayed by the Crown in 2010. Though the details of why this was done are unknown to the public, and I could not find any information on it. Perhaps another one of my viewers could inform me of that. In December 2007, he was actually sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, which is the longest sentence then available for murder under Canadian law. This case has not only been labeled the most complex, but also one of the most expensive and horrific serial cases in North American history, and to be quite frank, I can't disagree with them. That all being said, I would also like to impress upon you, my dearest viewers, of a little theory of mine. That being that very few killers of any magnitude, serial or otherwise, are born as such, and that the vast majority of them are in fact made, a bit of nurture over nature, as it were. Now, I am not saying all serial killers or all killers are befitting of this theory. In fact, H.H. Holmes, Jack the Ripper, and the Zodiac Killer I would exempt from this theory, as two of which, Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer's biographies are currently not known, so I cannot in fact include them in that theory. And for H.H. Holmes, there is no evidence that he ever had an abusive or traumatic event in his childhood. In fact, it seems to be the exact opposite for the most part. So, I will conclude with that as my citation. However, the story I am about to tell you, and I personally discovered about Robert Pickton, seems to fit that theory to the letter, as it does with most other serial killers. Robert was the middle child of 3 siblings to his parents and lived on a pig farm roughly 15 miles from Vancouver. The oldest sibling was in fact a sister who did not live with them, but in fact lived with relatives several miles away, as their father felt that a pig farm was no place to raise a young lady. The 2 boys, Robert and his little brother David, were not so lucky. They stayed behind and worked on the farm. This is where the story turns and actually began to sadden me. You see, the boys did not have an easy upbringing, as most serial killers also do not have easy upbringings, and in fact most are highly traumatic, and the stereotypical sob story, yada yada yada. I'm not saying that this is 100% certain, or even that if you have a traumatic childhood that you will become a serial killer. I am saying that it does play a hellish factor, though. And I say that they did not have an easy upbringing, not just due to the hard labor that they were subjected to, or the primitive living conditions, but also, and more so, due to their rather tyrannical mother, who is said to have been a very antisocial and very brisk and abrasive woman by neighbors and other locals. And to this I have to agree that after hearing some things about her, I would label her as a cold, brisk, and more so in my opinion, harpy of a woman who did in fact believe pigs came first and everything else was quite unimportant. This included, but was not limited to, her child's cleanliness. Often these children would go to school smelling of pigs, manure, and unwashed clothes and unwashed bodies. They were picked on mercilessly by their classmates, often being called stinky piggies. Not the most creative, but I would imagine that would rather sting a bit. In fact, Robert did poorly in school, as most serial killers tend to do, and was even labeled as slow by his teachers, who did in fact give him special lessons to help aid this. However, The boys would often skip school and hide under their beds to hide the fact that I did skip school, and would stay there until school let out. They had no friends or really any social interactions outside of their family, and had little support at home of any kind for a truly healthy mindset to thrive, let alone survive in. But the most telling and unfortunately tragic aspect of Robert's life was about to unfold, and one that actually did make me feel almost sorry for him. Almost. After much saving and many years, Robert was able to purchase a calf from an auction, and that calf became Robert's pet and only friend. Robert would even rush home to tend to and nurture his calf, and truly became the only thing Robert seemed to love. And I do believe this calf would be the tipping point in his life. Tragically, one day Robert returned home to find his beloved calf gone. Robert asked his mother about the calf and was quite frankly and briskly told to look in the barn. It was there that Robert found that his beloved calf had been slaughtered. He was understandably hysterical, but his mother was unwilling to give him any comfort or even any explanation as to why his calf had been slaughtered. The death of his beloved calf not only ended the life of his only friend, but also truly any hope for Robert loving or even caring for anyone else. In that moment, I do believe a monster that he would later become was in fact born within him upon that day and in that traumatic incident. The years passed and Robert stayed on the farm. His brother, however, did eventually leave. Robert dropped out of school at age 14. He later on took an apprenticeship as a butcher and actually found he had a talent for it. It was during this apprenticeship and these years that were considered the happier times in his life. However, as most things, this happier time did not last. In fact, when his younger brother David turned 16, David went for a joyride in the truck along the dirt road in front of their farm, and due to being unexperienced, struck a young boy who had been walking in the road. David then turned around panicking and drove back home to his mother and told her what had happened. And I still refer to her as this harpy of a woman, claimed to know just what to do. She told David to fix the truck and put it in the barn, and she herself would take care of the boy, which you will find is not a very comforting thought process. And it is said that she did in fact find the boy, badly injured but alive, and this ice queen of a woman, instead of helping the boy or taking him to the local hospital to save his life, decided she would rather merely push the boy into a water-filled ditch, where he later drowned. His death was later ruled as an accident after his body was found, and since no evidence was even found by the police, though they were rather skeptical of calling it an accident, no charges were ever filed. And in this moment, I do believe Robert learned if he could get away with it, that was all that mattered. After Robert, who was now in his early 20s, left his apprenticeship and was working full-time on his farm, his parents, due to old age, and his mother, later due to cancer, passed away. This is also thought to be a rather traumatic incident for Robert, as he was his mother's primary caregiver during that time, and had to watch his once tyrannical but powerful mother wither away to a helpless husk of a woman. This is thought to have also added into his distaste for other human life. After both parents had passed, him and his siblings split the meager inheritance they had between themselves. His siblings wanted nothing to do with the farm, though his brother did live on the northern part of it, while Robert lived on a separate end of it in a trailer. Robert then began to spend his days on the farm and his nights downtown in a seedy area for prostitutes and looking for a good time. Eventually, this would turn into a regular routine and a rather haunting one, as he soon developed a reputation of power, coming from a place where he had no power and was merely an old farm boy. He found that downtown, due to his generosity with his money and his good old boy charm, as false as it was, that he had influence there. He had power and he had money, thus making him a rather popular John for the sex workers and prostitutes of the area, and even for the drug-addicted souls. He found that he rather liked this power, and, as is typical of most serial killers, caused him to escalate. This routine would soon turn violent after Robert allegedly raped a 14-year-old girl he found walking down the street and held her at knife point. Though it wasn't until a decade later, after this event, and after selling a part of the farm for roughly $2 million, did Robert and his piggy palace, as it would soon be known as, turn into a literal house of horror. A worker for the Pickton brothers, a one Bill Hiscock, called it a creepy-looking place and noted that it was patrolled by a 270-kilogram or 600-pound boar, one of the few pigs that were actually on the farm. "I never saw a pig like that, who would chase you and bite at you. It was running out with the dogs around the property," he described Pickton as a pretty quiet guy, hard to strike up a conversation with, and whose sometimes bizarre behavior, despite no evidence of substance abuse, would draw attention. It is always the quiet ones, isn't it? But then again, no one plots murder out loud, now do they? Robert had by this time fallen into a steadier and more predictable and hauntingly violent pattern, days on the farm and nights on Skid Row downtown patrolling for prostitutes and drug addicts. And as this did so, his violence would again start to escalate, often becoming very quickly violent towards the women who turned him down or would not do as he asked. What was described as very unpleasant sexual acts, though it does not go into detail. The Pickton brothers, after, began to neglect the site's farm operations. They registered a non-profit charity, the Piggy Palace Good Time Society, with the Canadian government in 1996, as aiming to organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. Its events included raves and wild parties featuring Vancouver prostitutes and gatherings in a converted slaughterhouse. Yes, a lovely place for a party, I would guess. These events attracted as many as 2,000 people at any given time, and even members of the Hells Angels biker gang were known to frequent the farm. On March 23rd in 1997, Pickton was charged with the attempted murder of a sex worker by the name of Wendy, whom he had stabbed several times during an altercation at the farm. Wendy had informed the police that Pickton had handcuffed her, but she had escaped after suffering several lacerations. She told them she had disarmed him and stabbed him with his weapon. She then had run off the farm, and being barely clothed as well, managed to flag down a passerby, an elderly couple, who, in their good nature and true Canadian stereotype, agreed to take her to the nearest emergency room where she could recover and seek treatment for her wounds. Pickton also sought treatment at Eagle Ridge Hospital, though it was a different hospital than his victim, luckily. He was released on a $2,000 bond, a bit cheap if you ask me, but whatever. The charge was later dismissed in January of 1998, as Wendy was reported to be too afraid of Pickton to testify, and I honestly can't say I blame her. Months later, the Picktons were sued by officials for violating zoning ordinances, neglecting the agriculture for which it had been zoned for, and for having altered a large farm building on the land for the purpose of holding dances, concerts, and other recreations. By now, the families of many missing women were already coming forward, and tragically, due to where they were from, and who they were, the police unfortunately dismissed any foul play, chalking it up as they were just with another John for an indefinite period of time, or had just gotten on a bus and left, as they were known to do. Unfortunately, the number of missing women was growing and growing fast, and tragically there was not even an alert, or media alert, I should say, to any of the Vancouver people, or even the Canadian people as it were, of a spike in missing women. In fact, the only warnings that were even given out were from mouth to mouth. I'm sorry, I worded that poorly, were word of mouth. My mistake. From the sex workers and drug addicts who would tell each other, "I'm going out tonight. If I do not return, come looking for me." However, due to Pickton's reputation as being a good time and being generous with his money, as he was now flush with cash after the $2 million he had sold a part of his farm for, he still managed to get prostitutes and, of course, drug addicts with the promise of money and drugs. Quick citation, my numbers may be off in this next bit. I could not find a consistent number of women who had been reported missing before the investigation was officially launched. I do believe the most consistent number of women missing had reached nearly 50 before any true investigation was officially launched, due to the systematic bias within the RCMP and Vancouver Police, which led to a great delay in the investigation and disappearance of these women from the downtown east side who became victims of this serial killer, and I do believe is something we can all agree was a blunder of the worst kind alone. Due to this bias, a monster was allowed to walk free for far too long, and I am sure all police involved feel the full weight of this and deeply regret this happening. I will not bash them for it, I am merely stating fact. Needless to say, for these victims, society and the police who were supposed to protect them failed them not just once, but twice, in life and in death. Even if the investigation, after all it did, and I do agree it did a great deal, and it did result in removing this killer from society, I think we can all agree that for these victims, even all that was done came along just a little too late. During this time, the number of missing women was roughly about 20 or in the 20s, and it would only get worse. Back on the pig farm from hell, the Picktons ignored the legal pressure and held a New Year's party for the year of 1998 after which they were faced with an injunction banning future parties on the property. The police were authorized to arrest and remove any person attending future events at the farm. The society's nonprofit status was removed the following year for an inability to procure financial statements. It was then after subsequently disbanded. Over the course of the next 3 years, Hiscock, again the worker on the farm, noticed that women who visited the farm eventually went missing, as so many families had already done so. On February 6 of 2002, finally now, the police task force was then finally taking notice after an anonymous tip came in for the Pictons actually having illegal firearms. A search warrant was issued for such at the property. After the Pictons were taken into custody, police obtained a second court order to search the farm as a part of the BC Missing Women's investigation. Personal items, unfortunately, began to be found belonging to the missing women, and were not only found at the farm, but also within Robert Picton's trailer. The farm was then sealed off by members of the joint RCMP and Vancouver Police Department task force. The following day, Robert Picton was charged with weapons offenses, but was later released and was kept under police surveillance. It wasn't until February 22nd that Picton was arrested again and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Serena Abotsway and Mona Wilson. On April 2nd, 3 more charges were added for the murders of Jacqueline McDonald, Diane Rock, and Heather Bottomley. A 6th murder charge for that of Andrea Josberry, followed shortly by a 7th for Brenda Wolfe. 4 more charges were then added on September 20th for the slayings of Georgina Pepin, Patricia Johnson, Helen Hallmark, Jennifer Furminger, Heather Chinook, Tanya Hulk, I'm sorry if I'm botching any of these names, Sherry Irving, and Igna Hall, bringing the total to 15, making the investigation the largest of any serial killer in Canadian history. And it was about to get worse. On May 26th of 2005, 12 more charges were laid against Robert Picton for the killings of Cara Ellis, Andrea Borhaven, Deborah Lynn Jones, Maureen Frey, Tiffany Drew, Carrie Kowalski, Sarah D. Vries, again, I'm terribly sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names, Cynthia Felix, Angela Jardin, Wendy Crawford, and Diana Melnick. And, of course, a 1 Jane Doe, bringing the total number of first-degree murder charges to a record number of 27 in Canadian history. Upon Robert's incarceration, the face of the man truly came to light, as he not only remained calm and collected, but almost arrogantly so, during the police questioning. He claimed he had nothing to do and had no idea how any of this was tied to him. It was then that the police decided to change tactics. After sending Robert back to his cell, they placed an undercover officer in there with him, posing as a cellmate, and it is there that Robert, true to the serial killer's stereotypical ego, confessed everything. He claimed he had gotten sloppy at the end, and that he had been going for an even 50 and just fell short of it, implying that the death toll could be anywhere between the original 6, as he was charged with and convicted of, to a grand total of 49. Now, that all being said, I would also like to add to the fact that most serial killers that are active and are captured, the average number of the body count is actually 10. So for him to have the maximum number of 49 is over quadruple what is the average, which is not only impressive in the worst possible way, but absolutely horrific. Excavations of the Farm of Horror continued through November of 2003. The cost of the investigation is estimated to have been around $70 million by the end of that year. According to the government, as of 2015, the property has been fenced off and is underlain by the Crown in Right of British Columbia. In the meantime, all of the buildings on the property have by now been demolished. Forensic analysis proved difficult because the bodies may have been left to decompose or be eaten by insects and pigs on the farm. This would make forensics analysis difficult due to the fact that once the flesh is gone, the methods that we currently have to show type of death or manner of death becomes increasingly difficult, as of course sometimes the bones are not disturbed during the actual murder, though normally they are. It also becomes difficult because then the forensic scientists who are analyzing the bodies have to determine what was caused by animals or even equipment being used, given the damage to the bodies, and distinctively take them from which ones were used to kill the person if the bones were in fact marked during the actual murder. And also given the fact that Robert Pickton did use butchering equipment, which could be anywhere from a vertical saw to saw the women in half, which is a theory that has been passed around actually. And due to the kinds of knives that were used to dismember the women, would make it extremely difficult for any true cause of death to be determined. And even the amount of time that the bodies had been there on the farm, once it is all skeletal remains, then becomes a bit of a mystery itself. Thus, also making it one of the more complex and horrific cases of North American history, which is why I said I cannot argue with them. During the early days of those excavations, forensic anthropologists actually brought in some very heavy equipment as well, including 2 50-foot or 15-meter flat conveyor belts and soil shifters to find traces of remains, as of course they had been chopped up and scattered throughout the farm. It is widely suggested that to get rid of the bodies, Robert possibly dismembered them in the same way one would butcher pigs. It is also suggested that he may have used a nearby animal waste facility to get rid of any excess bones or even flesh, as one would do with livestock. As gruesome as that is to imagine, it does get worse, as at least 2 victims' heads, hands, and feet were kept in buckets within Robert's horrific butchery barn. And in fact, he was even seen dismembering one of the women by a female friend who was an heroin addict. She had fallen asleep on his couch in his trailer to sleep off some of the drugs that she had taken with him, and had been awoken by something in the night. Seeing a light in a nearby barn, she went out to investigate. before her, and to her horror, hanging on a meat hook, reportedly, were two painted legs and toenails of a woman. She did scream and ran off the farm, but Robert did not pursue her. It is guessed that he did not pursue her and kill her because he knew her personally, and on average, serial killers do not kill those whom they know very well. They mostly prefer to go after strangers. Now, this is not in any way a suggestion that you should go and find yourself a serial killer friend. They are incredibly dangerous human beings, and if you do in fact find one, I do suggest you go straight to the police. And it is also said that this woman, this friend of Robert's, did not go to the police simply due to her fear of Robert at that time, which I honestly can't blame her. On March 10th, 2004, it was revealed that Pickton also may have ground up the human flesh and mixed it with pork that he sold to the public. This caused the Providence's health authority to issue a warning and recall on most pork. Another claim was that he may have fed the bodies directly to his pigs, which honestly would be just as bad, as some human diseases can actually be transferred through another animal's flesh. If the animal eats something that is diseased, in this case human flesh that is diseased, as, let's be quite honest with each other, sex workers are more susceptible to carry diseases such as STDs as are drug addicts due to dirty needles and the like. Those diseases can be then transferred into the pig through their consumption of the flesh, and when those pigs are subsequently slaughtered and then given to the public, there is no amount of cooking that can kill those said diseases and can then be passed to humans. On a side note, that does remind me of an old fable I once heard in Chicago of a butcher who killed his wife after an argument and got rid of her body by selling it in his butcher shop as pork. And for a little fun fact for all of you sickos out there who, like me, actually read this stuff, in many ways it has been said and even documented that pork or pig flesh is actually very similar to human flesh. It is often used in science experiments to determine the level of damage that certain weapons would have had or do have on the human body, as it reacts in a very similar way. It even decomposes at a similar rate to humans. It is also used in forensic science to determine time of death and other such matters. There are even reports from some cannibals who have stated that pork even has a very similar taste and texture to human flesh. In fact, some claim if you season it right, odds are, unless you have knowingly tasted human flesh and tasted pork flesh, you would never be able to tell the difference between the two. Think about that the next time you decide to throw some pork chops on the grill. Pickton's trial began on January 30th in 2006 in New Westminster, Canada. Pickton pleaded not guilty to the 27 charges of first-degree murder in the Supreme Court of British Columbia. The first phase of the trial took most of the year to determine what evidence might be admitted before the jury. Reporters, however, were not allowed to disclose any of the material presented in those arguments. On March 2nd, one of the 27 counts was actually rejected by Justice James Williams for a lack of evidence, though it does not go into detail as to why it was rejected or what this lack of evidence truly was. On August 9th, Justice Williams severed the charges, splitting them into two groups, one group of 6 counts and the other group of 20 counts. The trial proceeded on the group of 6 counts. The remaining 20 counts could have been held and heard in a separate trial, but ultimately were stayed on August 4th of 2010. because of the publication ban, full details of the decision are not publicly available. But the judge has explained that trying all 26 charges at once would have put an unreasonable burden on the jury, as the trial could have lasted up to 2 years and would have had an increased chance of a mistrial. The judge also added that the 6 counts he chose had materially different evidence from the other 20. Office of Inspector General Senior Investigator J.R. McDougall was the case agent for the investigation. The date for the jury trial of the first 6 counts were initially set to start on January 8th of 2007, but was later delayed till January 22nd. On that date, Pickton faced first-degree murder charges in the deaths of Frey, Abotsway, Papin, Josbury, Wolfe, and Wilson. The media ban was then lifted, and for the first time, Canadians heard the details of what was found during the long investigation. Skulls cut in half, with hands and feet stuffed inside. The remains of one victim had been found stuffed in a garbage bag, and her blood-stained clothing found in Pickton's trailer. Part of another victim's jawbone and teeth were found beside Pickton's slaughterhouse, and a .22 caliber revolver with an attached, and I'm not joking when I say this, dildo containing both his and the victim's DNA. In a videotape recording played for the jury, Pickton claimed to have attached the dildo to his weapon as a makeshift silencer. Now, upon hearing this, I thought there was no way in hell that would work. Upon further investigation, yes, it would work. In a manner, it would. I do not recommend you doing this. Do not try this at home. There are much better ways to use a dildo, and in fact, it would just be disrespectful to the actual weapon itself, so yeah, please don't try this. And for fuck's sake, and I know I'm going to have to say this just to cover my own ass, but do not try to use a dildo that is attached to a gun in the correct manner of which a dildo is normally used. In fact, if you do this, you're a fucking idiot, and just don't do it. This has been your public service announcement for the day. As of February 20th, 2007, the following information was presented to the court: that during Pickton's trial, lab staff testified that about 80 unidentified DNA profiles, roughly half male and half female, had shown up on evidence. The items the police found in Pickton's trailer were as follows: a loaded .22 revolver with a dildo over the barrel of the gun as a silencer, presumably, and with 1 round fired. Boxes of a .357 Magnum handgun ammunition, night vision goggles, 2 pairs of Fox fur-lined handcuffs, a syringe with 3 milliliters of blue liquid inside, and Spanish fly aphrodisiac. And just to break up the horror of this all, the Spanish fly aphrodisiac is actually not from a fly, it is actually from a beetle. And in fact, it is from a emerald beetle of the blister beetle family. I do not, by any means, recommend that you try to find this or even try to use this, as blister beetles are, in their own way, quite toxic and could do anything from making you very, very sick to actually killing you. So it is not a fly, nor is it an aphrodisiac. It is an old wives' tale, so please do not use a beetle to help your sex drive. A videotape of Pickton's friend Scott Chubb saying Pickton had told him a good way to kill a female heroin addict was to inject her with windshield washer fluid, which was also presented to the jury and the courts, and was also reportedly to be the blue liquid that was found in the syringe in his trailer. Another videotape that was played for the Pickton jury, in which an associate by the name of Andrew Bellwood said Pickton mentioned killing prostitutes by handcuffing and strangling them, then bleeding and gutting them before feeding them to his pigs. Photos of the contents of a garbage can were also shown to the jury that were found in Pickton's slaughterhouse, which held some remains of Mona Wilson. In October 2007, a juror was actually accused of having made up their mind already that Pickton was innocent. The trial judge questioned the juror about this, saying, "It's reported to me you said from what you had seen you are certain Mr. Pickton was innocent. There was no way he could have done this, and that the court system had arrested the wrong guy." The juror denied this completely. Justice Williams ruled that they could remain on the jury since it had not been proven they had made those statements. Justice James Williams suspended jury deliberations on December 6 of 2007 after he discovered an error in his own charge to the jury earlier in the day. The jury had submitted a written question to the justice requesting clarification of his charge, asking, "Are we able to say yes, in meaning finding Pickton guilty, if we infer the accused acted indirectly?" Basically meaning, can we still find him guilty on a lesser charge, more or less. On December 9th of 2007, the jury returned with a verdict that stated that Pickton was not guilty on the 6 counts of first-degree murder, but that he was guilty on the 6 counts of second-degree murder. A second-degree murder conviction carries a punishment of a life sentence with no possibility of parole for a period between 10 and 25 years, that is to be set by the trial judge. On December 11th of 2007, after reading 18 victim impact statements, British Columbia Supreme Court Judge Justice James Williams sentenced Pickton to life with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum punishment for second-degree murder, and equal to the sentence which would have been imposed for a first-degree murder conviction. Justice James Williams later stated in passing that Mr. Pickton's conduct was murderous and repeatedly so. "I cannot know the details, but I know this. What happened to them was senseless and despicable." Personally, I find Pickton's sentencing to be by far too lenient, but then again, the court system in the United States is very different from that in Canada. Now, seeing as I have now run out of time, as I'm going well into half hour, 45 minutes, and seeing as there is a lot of information on this case that I did not get to cover for the sake of time, I will link the full documentary concerning Robert Pickton and his crimes in the description below for anyone who wishes to view it. And that is the end of our story for now, my bloodthirsty horde. I hope you all enjoyed the special request. I know I did. In fact, I did enjoy it so much that I am encouraging you to list anyone you wish to talk about next time in my next video in the comment section below. So, until next time, my dear viewers, remember, blessed be and stay classy.